And we're live with our 271st episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on social media, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on social media. Seth, say hi.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. Excited to be back as usual. We've got quite a bit that's been going on. I know both Ken and I have been really busy, start of 2025, trying to figure out how to take over TikTok, that kind of thing, right? As one does.
What's
But
going on with
realistic,
TikTok?
I don't know.
Oh,
You really don't know that it's going to get like dropped by the US here next week, right?
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
And I'm not on TikTok.
Welcome. Yeah. Well, that's why, right? Like,
and I don't watch the news as much as a lot of people. So
yeah. Yeah. Basically, it's going to get banned. That's, we'll see, because, people get up in arms about stuff, about technology that they don't understand. But,
is it really getting banned? Like they're just taking it like, wow. So
unless it gets acquired by, and like my understanding is pretty fuzzy too. I just know that unless it gets acquired by a US company by like next week, by the 19th, then they're going to cut off all access. Basically, like they're pulling it off the app stores. You won't be able to use it anymore.
So like even the website or whatever, you probably won't be able to use. Dang. Yeah. All right.
Well, and that's been the funny thing. Like as far as like the influencers that are on TikTok are moving over to, there's some other like TikTok variant that's only available it's available nationwide or like worldwide.
Does it start with, does it have red in the name?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So actually I do remember this because that's funny. My wife and my kid were talking about this. I totally forgot about that conversation. Yeah. And he was saying it was red something and then it's like
Red Note. Yep. Red Note.
Red Note. Yep. There you go. And then he said something about, he's like, it's communist too or something. I was like, what are you talking about? Like he's 12, right? Max is
yeah, he knows that stuff, right? Like, yeah.
I was like, what are you talking about?
well, I mean, and the funny thing, and granted, we're just got off the rails. This is how today is going to be. Yeah, just if you're listening, just be aware. If you want to push us a direction, let us know what it is. But the funny thing is, if you go on Red Note, it's like everybody's like, look, this is my cat. You can, now like, you can know all about my cat, China, right? Like, where do I need to upload the files for you, right? Like, it's just like this ridiculous, yeah.
That's hilarious.
Anyway,
yeah, I totally forgot about overhearing their conversation about this, and yeah, that's funny.
Yep.
Yeah, that's good.
So there's that going on. Dang, right? Like I went off the rails even during the introduction.
I love it.
We do have training next week. There are a couple of spots still available. Training.absoluteappsec.com. We'll be doing harnessing LLMs for AppSec. That's the 23rd and 24th. You can register and let us know if you have any questions on that. Even if you register and problems pop up, we'll be offering other courses. Every couple of months we'll be redoing at least like harnessing LLMs, practical secure code review. We're going to be doing more online sessions this year for anyone that would like to finally get that training and get that out of their, learn how to use those LLMs, right? Like, what it is that we're, where it's effective, right? Besides that, I do want to give a shout out to Redpoint. Redpoint Security is our sponsor for today. Redpoint specializes in code security by coders, which is bolstered by years of experience testing applications and conducting code reviews against all types of applications. Redpoint also offers secure code training to help ground your teams in better security practices across the development lifecycle. So check out redpointsecurity.com for more information and put your company on a path to better security. Along those lines, if you would like to sponsor, please reach out to info@absoluteappsec.com or Seth or Ken. Hit us up in Slack. We'd love to include your company as a sponsor for Absolute AppSec. Yeah, I think that's everything for as far as like the introduction goes. Ken, is there anything else that you would like to bring up now before we dive into some of the meat of today?
Only because you mentioned it popped in my head. Next month, Cactus Con. I'm excited for that. That's going to be a really fun one. I know we're going to try and get something together that's to maybe not a formal happy hour like we did last time, but maybe something in a similar vein. So we'll put out more information as we get closer to CactusCon. But I'm really excited for that one. I know we just had ShmooCon here locally. I didn't attend. I wanted to, but here's the issue with ShmooCon, and this is the last year with ShmooCon, right? So this was the last year. I had put it on my calendar for the CFP to like submit for it, and just completely missed that date, right? And then the thing is like I'm not gonna go through their ticketing system at all. I've said this many times publicly. I don't care if it hurts anybody gets upset. I really don't. I think it's a ridiculous ticketing system. I never thought it was a good idea. I maintain now that ShmooCon's over still, it was never a good idea. I think the thing it was trying to solve for, which is like allow folks who maybe are students or whatever and need affordable tickets, that's like you kind of have to compete to get a ticket theoretically anyways. Because the truth is once you go there, you can get a ticket from anybody. I mean, if you actually just go in there, like you can get a ticket from it. But the point is like on principle, I'm like either I'm submitting a talk and doing it that way or nothing. I'm not going to go and like scrounge around for a ticket and just put it on the site. I'll buy it. But if you do it this way, I'm not going to be involved. So anyways, it is the last year of ShmooCon. But sorry, my point being, I know there's other conferences. I think do you have anywhere besides CactusCon in February? Because I think in March you're doing CypherCon, right?
Yeah. CypherCon in March. I mean, KernelCon is going on at the same time as CypherCon and other things, right? Like I had to pick and choose this year, right? We've been at KernelCon for the last 3 or 4 years, right? So kind of had to make a change just this year for me personally. The other one that I'm looking at and that I'm tracking is later, the B-Side San Francisco and RSA. I'm pretty sure we're going to do a happy hour at RSA again, for the podcast, sponsored by Red Pointed Dry Run and whoever else, right? Like there might even be a couple other partners that are associated with that. We've done that for a number of years, and that's that feels like that's going to be an annual thing for us. We are hoping to be more involved at B-Side San Francisco this year. We've got a panel that we've submitted, plus a couple of talks, and just want to get there's a lot of people that we know that'll be there. A lot of guests of the podcast that are at B-Side San Francisco, that are in that area. I mean, it's the Bay Area. We've got Clint and Jivan and Asta will be down there as well.
Else. Ron Paris will be there, I'm sure. Yeah, all kinds of Justin Collins, all kinds of good folks out there. So, definitely looking forward to the B-Sides side of it. I RSA is cool too, in a sense, not the conference itself, but in terms of like meeting up with people. That whole week is actually pretty nice, I guess. But it's a good shout out. I know like one other thing I was going to tease out is next week there will be a big announcement from Dry Run. So Dry Run Security will have something next week that we put out there that's a pretty significant announcement. So just teasing it out. But so what did you want to talk about today? I know we've got several topics and I just don't know what we should go into first.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I wanted to talk about, I wanted to get your take on Portswigger, on top 10 web hacking techniques. The candidate list is out there. You can actually go vote for what you think were the top 10 hacking techniques for 2024. In the past, you and I have done like deep dives into the actual hacking techniques that make that list year over year, right? And some of these we've talked about before, like we've got talks in there from some of the Portswigger team, like Gareth or Garth, like the email stuff that's happened. That's pretty traditional. But I wanted to get your take on the usefulness of this, right? Like, what is your general feeling about the top 10 web hacking techniques and, Portswigger doing this year over year?
Yes. Well, so, because it's a good question, because I was thinking like, how does this actually get used, right? Is it something that is it like used for training? Is it used for awareness? Is it used for risk prioritization? Uh, I mean, if it's more around sort of creating buzz, highlighting people's interesting research and what they've contributed to the community, maybe new techniques like, I mean, granted, it was James Kettle's research, but that made
Yeah.
James Kettle's list. However, James Kettle is awesome, and his request smuggling technique was on there one year, and that was like legitimately a new thing that is actually a problem and needs to be solved, and was really, really cool. So I guess the question really becomes, how's it being used, just to understand if the way it's being used is the right kind of approach. But what do you think?
Yeah, that's like that tracks with my own experience with the top 10 web hacking techniques. I feel like it's a inspiration. It's different. It's good for marketing. It's good for the security researchers to get their name out there. Typically, there's some interesting like nuances and things that they're finding from a penetration testing perspective. From the stuff that I do on a day-to-day basis, it's inspiring, but it's not super useful, right? Mainly because let me just pull it up, right? And this is the issue that I have with it. Even though the hacks are super cool, like the techniques are effective, they make you think in a slightly different way. But let me just.
And while you're pulling that up, I'm going to add some sort of context about your background and what you're. So like, for those listening, I'm sure Seth runs a consulting company, right? And sees and interacts with a lot of different organizations, from your cool, trendy, hip startups to, your not cool, hip, trendy startups. I don't know what. Yeah, maybe like
to that point.
To
that point, I'm looking at code right now that actually the first Git commit for it, 1999.
Yeah, there you go. That's what I'm trying to say. And so I think like you have a pretty good or you get a pretty good worldview consistently of what's actually out there. I think you get a pretty good view of realistically what's affecting most people.
Yeah.
Your
So
average.
yeah. Yes. Yeah. My average, like, that, and that's kind of what I take from this is, right. Okay. There's these new techniques, right. And you could talk to, some of our senior resources as well, right. Like even things like the web caching stuff or, that came from Kettle a couple of years ago, or SSRF, like the list, hey, like that's super cool when it's effective. But on a day-to-day basis, when we're looking at very specific code bases and very specific applications, and it's not like the wider internet at large, most of that is pretty ineffective, right? That's what I boil it down to, right? Like, okay, so we've got research that's into the Django ORM, like leaking sensitive data. As you start digging into it, though, like whether or not it is effective or applicable to the application that you're looking at, right? Like it calls out Django ORM, but then, right, like the ORM leak stuff is against specific CMSs. Whether or not the code that you're looking at is going to be vulnerable to this, like you've got to apply it to what you're actually looking at, right?
There's actually two of those submissions too around the plorming stuff with Django CRM. Yeah, one's about creating significant delay. One's about like execution, basically kind of like a DOS almost. But then there's another one that's about sensitive data, which is like weird. But yeah,
yeah. Well, yeah, and that's where I kind of go to is it's like this is stuff that I end up putting into my back pocket as far as like, oh, I saw a technique that was similar to this or was using the same technology or whatever it was, right? Like it's really interesting reading, really useful to kind of modify my own techniques on how I'm assessing or pen testing or looking in code for specific items. But it's also not it's not always applicable, right? So I have to take it with a grain of salt on whether or not it's going to be useful on a day-to-day basis and how much attention I should pay to some of this. So I guess what I'm saying is, for me, it ends up being more of kind of awareness document or inspiration, or like gotchas that I should keep in the back of my mind. But I don't necessarily run into it on a day-to-day basis, right? Like, it's typically, hey, we found this in Django ORMs. There was a CVE, it got updated. So the only thing I really care about telling my devs is make sure that you are on the latest version of Django, right? So it doesn't affect my day-to-day that much, right? Like, when it really comes down to it. Yeah.
There's a lot of SQL injection in this. It's actually really surprising. I can't believe how much SQL related bits I'm kind of seeing, which is pretty cool. I mean, it's old, or excuse me, new takes on a potentially old, or not potentially, like it's old vulnerability name in class. But yeah, it's interesting to see that. I don't know. I think it's fun. Again.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I would really like to see again? Portswigger's blog. That's what I'd really like to see. We could talk all day about the top 10 web hacking techniques, but I'd really like to see that blog back. I know why they stopped it. They put out but we talked about it. But yeah, I'd love to see it again. Now they get the $100 million influx of funding, right? So they could do it. Yeah, I don't know. A lot of this is, what is funny though, is watching how many of these are about Ruby's like messing something up, whether it's SAML, whether it's JSON, whether it's
whatever
RCEs in it. I'm just like, man, I can't even defend you anymore, Ruby. Yeah, Ruby SAML GitLab auth bypass. Yeah, I can't even. Just like, yeah, I love writing in. Well, I haven't written in Ruby in a long time, actually. I've been spending more time in Python, frankly. And for a while, it was a lot of TypeScript, but Python seems to be my day-to-day these days, mostly because of the the ML and AI stuff. But in any case, yeah, I don't know. It's a cool list. People vote. Go vote if you want to. And yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff submitted here.
Yeah, there was. Part of my issue, right, like with the voting too, is I start to go look at it and I'm like, oh crap, like it's a homework. It's homework that I have to do, right? If I actually wanted to vote on it. Otherwise, I'm just doing it based purely on the name, and I don't like to do that, right? Like, because it's really easy to come up with a catchy title that doesn't necessarily reflect the research underneath, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think they've probably done a lot of that due diligence to make sure that it is something at least novel that's going on. Or extending research in some way. I mean, it's Portswigger after all, but still, like how many different, because like as I'm looking through that list, right, like we've got probably 50 different. That's a massive amount, right?
That's a lot
of reading.
In fact,
actually go through.
Since I first opened it up till now, there's been some additional entries, it looks like. So, or it reordered itself in some way, because the one that was interesting is or the one that was interesting, one of them that was interesting to me was like the PGX one, where you for the frac article. Hold on, let me see if I got it up.
Oh yeah, the frac article, the SQL injection.
That was cool. The world of select only Postgres SQL injections. That was actually really cool. I like that. It was a unique way. I'm going to put it up here. It was a unique way to exploit Postgres through PGX, which is a ORM for Golang. So,
yep.
Anyways, go check it out. It's pretty awesome.
That one when it came out, right? There's some really good research in there and really good approaches. Revisiting things. I mean, it's pushing the envelope for sure, right? Which is that is the thing that I appreciate about it, even if it is not useful to me on a daily basis. So, yeah.
Hey, so this is not something we discussed prior to this podcast. This is not something that we haven't even talked about it. But I am curious, outside of this top 10 web hacking, sorry to switch topics, but I am curious about your thoughts. Did you happen to see Sneak's response to Paul McCarty's um, uh,
Yes, it
post?
was. Wasn't it just
Or
on? Um, it was even featured in TLDR-sec. Did you
was
see
it?
that? Yeah,
No, I
the
know a new one
newsletter
came
that
out
came
today. I
out
haven't
yesterday.
read it.
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
was it yesterday?
yesterday. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, because
okay.
it's got like supply chain. Hold on, let me see. I'll pull it up, and we can take a look at it.
I'm definitely curious what you think of Sneak's response. I've read their response, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that one. I'm gonna bring the curmudgeon out in you today.
Yeah, let me see. Where is Sneak's response here? This was the Sneak's response was only on register. Okay. I haven't read the blog, right? Arguing they have done nothing wrong. Okay. All right, let's see. Team aims to help, find and help. Okay, so if you haven't seen it, like I know Paul's been in. I wasn't sure if it was in general or in random. Oh no, it was like Sneak on the defensive. You're right. Okay, so it's that article that's up there. I didn't read that, but he's been in general and he posted about like how Sneak had pushed packages to npm that targeted cursor, right? And it looked like they were doing research, but it's actual like malicious software, right? Like it's trying to even though it's research, right, it's doing things that probably shouldn't be doing, especially being pushed to a global repository without protections, whatever it is, right?
Yeah, well,
So
it ex, it yeah, Larry's got the popcorn out. Yeah, that's what you just said, Larry. Like it's they're like extracting all environment files or environment variables and sending it off to someone. What the fuck do you think are in those environment variables? Nothing good, man. And they said like they said something about, well, it's low probability of me installed. It's low likelihood of anything happening. Uh, high impact. Like they're still you're putting it out there so people will install it, run it, extract environment variables as a proof of concept. Like
yeah,
you got caught. Or at least you got the wrong person or the right person notice, I should say. Thank you, Paul.
yep.
And kind of put it out there like, hey, this is not cool. You know, you may not feel like you're exploiting anybody, but you are. And I don't know. They're the article's response was just I don't know how I felt about it. I didn't make me feel any better about the whole situation. I don't know about you. What did you take away from that?
Yeah, like getting through it, right? Like this, uh, they're trying to get ahead of it, right? Like as far as like, well, we always do security research and other people are doing it. They're absolutely right. But there's ways to go about your research that don't necessarily expose, uh, you know, secrets, right? Like and expose targets to additional risk. Because like in this case, right, like it worked out that there was, no sensitive data was disclosed. We just got to take them at their word there, right? Because they were sending it out. Um, and they're right. It's an interesting research subject. Probably the research needs to be done, but oh, man, I
Yeah,
feel
so
like
like imagine
it could have been,
you
yeah, it could have been
well
done with
just
better,
oh,
better thought, right? Better, like they could have put more thinking into what does the payload actually look like, right? Like, I mean, we always bag on the researcher that put rimrawfall into the npm repository years and years ago, right? Rm minus rf slash, and like the whole point of that was, dude, you could have done this with you could have found out the same thing with other techniques that weren't damaging, right? Um, I
Destructive,
think that's
yeah,
my take. Yeah.
destructive. Because while this isn't, maybe they don't feel that this is destructive. If you're on a security team and you're told, hey, our environment variables were like transmitted somewhere, and you know that they're going to have secret key values in there, it's like,
Well,
cool, man.
especially okay,
Guess what
so
I'm
so
spending this
it's
week
Cursor
doing, you
AI.
know?
It's a code editor. You've got a like extrapolate that out. You have a developer, a senior developer that has credentials for pushing code, for interacting with maybe even the production build, happens to have like certificates loaded up in his environment, SSH keys, other things. Like, you have just created a whole slew of work for that security team and that developer to go back and fix problems. And, granted, they probably shouldn't be installing, tools, but like, that aren't vetted, but we all, like, everybody does, right? Like, it's just, yeah, it doesn't feel great. Basically, that's what I'm getting at, right? It doesn't feel great. The response is a bit of CYA that, yeah.
Well, let's put it this way. You're a business owner. I'm a business owner. How would you feel if one of your employees did this and then you had to go and respond to the internet about it?
Yeah.
I'd be unhappy. I'd be very unhappy personally. I'd be very unhappy, you know? Yeah, I'd be very unhappy. So, I would feel like we went a little too far there. And I to your point, destructive, no. And again, like, this is where it crosses, for me, this is where it crosses the line, because it does become destructive the second I have to run an incident playbook because you've captured my credentials. Like that instantly, because that's the line for me, right? Like, I've talked about this many times where, of course, I'm not gonna. Igor Homakov. Yeah, I was gonna say. Of course, I can't remember his name. I can't remember his name. Homakov. When he, like, I've said this before, it's known that the push to even build a security team at GitHub was because Igor went in and said, "Hey, you've got mass assignment, this vulnerability they weren't really familiar with, GitHub, I mean, and it's in Ruby on Rails, and or the platform's written on Ruby on Rails. This is a mass assignment through Ruby on Rails, like the way it works, and you know." You want to fix this? They were like, whatever. And then he went and actually added himself to the Ruby on Rails community, and he gave one commit, which is like a update to a README or something very innocuous. And like, for me, that is weird, because yes, you kind of have to run an incident playbook to make sure that what they're telling you matches up with. But at the same time, it's like the level of value that proved, not just to GitHub, but also to the Ruby on Rails community. And then how that sort of, I guess, the value of what that provided was like really outweighed any potential sort of like, hey, we got to spend a day or two going through and make sure nobody else has exploited this. Like, it's a different beast in my mind. What I think you could argue either way there. You could probably argue that was somewhat destructive as well. And yeah.
Well, I
So
mean,
I don't know.
forcing someone's hand is one thing, right? Like, but it's a really fine line to walk, right? Like, I'm with you as far as like if one of your employees does something that is destructive or causes someone else pain or harm, right? Like, it's a hard thing.
In
It's a
that
hard discussion to
scenario,
have. Yeah.
yeah, and actually, as you're saying it, like in that scenario, he first of all already told them that there was an issue, and secondly, it was a very targeted. This is to the internet; anybody can download these packages. You know what I mean? So it's not quite the same.
Yeah, yeah.
I
It
felt
wasn't
like
super targeted, right? Yeah. Yep.
Paul did some good work there, and good job,
Yeah.
Paul.
Yeah. Well, okay. And to take this even further, right? Like, I have this, I don't know, a number of years ago, I gave this talk, like the Sputter, the talk on like building kind of security bots that identified problems without fully exploiting them. In the industry. And okay. And again, with the top 10 web hacking, techniques for 2024, right? We have, as an industry, a tendency to not think something is a security problem or needs to be resolved until there is a full exploit that's out there. Which means that there's a lot of security problems that exist, or like indications of security problems. And you're going to see this continue to be like, that list of web hacking techniques will continue to grow until we recognize that there's ways to identify these issues that don't have to fully exploit a specific problem in order to identify that there's an issue that could pop up, right? So if I go back to it, right, like if I go to a low level, what I'm talking about, right, like cross-site scripting, or like any of the, injection, like the content injection vulnerabilities. If you see content that comes back that's unencoded, there's probably a possibility there that there could be cross-site scripting, right? But in order to execute that in most environments, you have to figure out a way to bypass the current filter that exists, right? And to get paid by Google or somebody else, you have to figure out how to bypass the filter, right? Like you have to prove the exploit from a bug bounty research, or even from a security assessment perspective. And when I get back to it from a developer perspective or from an organization perspective, if I see any content that's unencoded that got pushed into like my database, right, I need to go identify where that is and fix it. That should already be in my backlog, is what it boils down to. I shouldn't have to fully exploit something to recognize that there could be a security issue in the future. And like, I know I'm getting off topic here as well, Ken, right?
There's no topic.
There's no topic. But I mean, so this has been kind of near and dear to me for a number of years. Is like, when I work with development teams, one of the things that we start to do is actually utilize security payloads and kind of like most significant bits, or most significant payloads that can lead to problems down the line. So from a content injection perspective, it's a pretty easy thing to lay out there. Like, what happens when single quotes get into strings? What happens when things aren't encoded properly, right? Like, you can identify that pretty quickly. You don't need to prove that you have cross-site scripting from a development perspective to know that that's going to be an issue, or could be an issue in the future. So let's go ahead and take care of it. And there's a number of different indicators that I would start to target with development teams along those lines that don't necessarily result in full exploitation. So,
yeah.
So, and the same thing should be done from a security research perspective. So like, hey, I don't need all the environment variables in this case, right? To just bring it back, to circle back around. All I need to do is prove that I can access that environment in some way, right? All you're doing is you're adding, you're pouring salt on the wound when it comes down to it, if you are taking it to full exploitation in a lot of cases.
Sorry, I'm looking at something that just got put into the yes. Nice. Securing Rails link that you put in.
Yep.
Yeah, reading that. Nice. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Well, when you do assessments, typically, you're pointing at, this is vulnerable, right? And I don't necessarily need to like run SQL map or manually perform SQL injection to show you that this query is obviously vulnerable, or there's it does depend. If you're doing a dynamic test, it does depend on what type of test it is too. Yeah. This sounds like it's pretty like specific to a situation you may have faced recently. That's why I'm.
Yeah, I mean, it is, right? And I always kind of like walk this line, right? Because we do a lot of dynamic or source assisted, like hybrid assessments. And, they always end up like littered with these best practice findings because of this, right? Hey, guess what? You're using string concatenation to build, SQL queries instead of an ORM. Yeah, we should take care of that, right? Because all we're doing is, watching the clock, and eventually it's going to come back to bite us, right? That sort of analysis is always there. And then Yeah. I don't know though, like, because we have like the red team style engagements where dynamic only, like how far can you get? That, most of the time there's like one or two pieces in this like attack chain that if you were to remove the ability to do X, right? Like, or access to this environment, or we'd set up the permissions in AWS properly, then you wouldn't have been able to get to this or do this like full execution and take over somebody's account, right? And so that's kind of what I start to go to from a development perspective is how do I take out those like highest risk execution points, or in order to secure an environment and lower the overall risk to an application or to an organization. So yeah, I'm just kind of going off, Ken. Yeah, let's.
No, it's okay. Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's great. It's actually nice to hear because I don't do as much. Well, I mean, yeah, we test literally all day long and would write software for that, but I mean, it's a lot of validating that it's working correctly. So I guess I still keep my finger on the pulse AppSec wise, but it's not quite the same as when I was at GitHub and I'm reviewing, code every single day and trying to find, holes and things like that, or trying to, wrangle and exploit some new service, to your point about like trying to see how far it can go, how many cool things I can do to it, So
Yeah.
it's nice to hear. It's nice to live vicariously through you. These days I'm more of a security engineer, separately, two different things, which we were just talking about before the podcast. It's funny how terrible security people are at writing code. Like we were talking about some project and I was looking, Seth mentioned it, and I looked at the code and I was like, oh, that's a lot of if else if statements there. It was, it's funny to watch like how even, and I include myself in that. It's like I write, prototypes, make things work, do some of the cool stuff, and then I'm always amazed at how the engineers and the team make it like performant and scalable, and handle exceptions well, and have tracing, and have all of the your favorite auditing and logging and all that. And it's just very humbling every time they're like, okay, thanks for your code. Yeah, that's great. It works. We're gonna do some things to it.
Wait, you mean that there's more than one type of exception, right? Like,
yeah, just catch it all. It's just you just catch everything.
Try catch, like as long as you put it
in,
like dump it to the log, it's fine, right? That's your login.
The first, to give you an idea what I'm talking about, the first ever, so in the product, there's these different, we call them policies publicly, but internally we call them analyzers inside, and each one does a different type of analysis. The first one I ever wrote took like 12 minutes to execute. And it was, I mean, for context, or for to kind of like explain that further, not right now, it's like they execute in like usually 10 seconds or less. And so it went from like 12 minutes and it was because of like queuing and better detection of like where what things we're actually going to analyze, and throwing out stuff we don't need. A lot of like little things that weren't so little, right? That added up to like way more performant results. Anyways, it's just kind of funny. Like it's humbling, but yeah. And then other parts of the job as a CTO, co-founder, marketing, sales, conversations, and sales enablement. And marketing, is like a whole set of things that you do. Relationship building too. I mean, I'm a big believer that for you to win, everybody's got to win, right? I'm a big believer in that. So I'm a pretty big fan of like creating strong relationships and sort of navigating those waters. But in terms of hardcore every day going in there and doing pen testing or security focused code review every single day, no, not as much. So it's now I look at these like top 10 web hacking lists and I'm like, oh, that's really cool and informative and something interesting, just because I just don't get that all the time. It's the same reason I like going to conferences. I have to go to the conferences. So does James, my co-founder, right? So do you as business owners. But I enjoy going to them because like I still get that connection to keeping a toe, on the offensive side, I guess is what I mean, versus like the defensive side and building for defense. So I don't know. It's just it's interesting. I think it's cool to like in your career to just kind of do this, like go try this thing, try that thing. It's all building experience. If you do the same thing, you're going to be a master at that thing. You're going to be amazing at that thing after 20 years, but you're going to maybe not be so amazing or knowledgeable in a bunch of other areas. So, I like going bouncing back and forth. And I know you've done the same in your career. I mean, you're a business owner now, but you've been a CISO, you've been a principal consultant, you've been, everything you've been a developer, you've done everything under the sun, really.
Yeah. Well, and part of that too, right? Like, finding what interests you is effective, but then it's also realizing where you need help. Like in your case, right? Like, hey, I know that I can code, and you can get something to a production level. Like I have done that in the course early in my career, right? But nowadays it's, man, can I identify the right resources that actually have been doing this for the past 20 years, as opposed to, hey, like it's going to take me 2-3 times as long. And is that really worth like the investment money, whatever it actually takes to push that along, right? Like proof of concept is one thing, but fully productionalizing an application or building it out. Yeah. Like there are costs associated with it, from a time perspective, from a, mental load perspective, that are really difficult to actually jump over. And you have to realize you're not going to be the expert in it, right? Like, so there's people that specialize in like the marketing, take that for example, right? Like search engine optimization, right? Like there are people that specialize in that and spend their whole careers in it. So expecting that you're going to be able to stand up your website and have it top ranked for your specific, niche within the first month is unrealistic, right? Because you're going up and you're competing against people that have that sort of experience. And the same thing, the same thing is true for anything in the security world, right? Like you go into a bug bounty and expecting that you're going to go find one of those top 10 web hacking techniques your first year in the bug bounty world is pretty unrealistic. It could happen, right? Depending on your experience and what it is you're actually going up against and like where you want to put your time. But it's probably unrealistic when you haven't necessarily put in that time yet. So,
yeah.
I don't know, man. We're going through advice here, and everything.
There's only going to be so many top 1%ers, right? So to your point about it being your first year and finding some incredible exploit and all that does happen, but it's the outliers, right? So, and I've thought about it lately, like what it must be like to join up now, because you have this influx of people that have been going for their cybersecurity degrees, right? And so you've got a much larger pool of people now, theoretically anyways, funneling into cybersecurity. But you have, and I've heard this over and over again, budget cuts, and the budget cuts also include personnel cuts. So like there's obviously less demand, more supply, with more people entering in, with the budget cuts and personnel headcount cuts. And I'm like, man, it's probably very, very competitive and difficult right now. I don't know that for any kind of fact at all, because I'm not there, right? And unless listeners want to chime in on that one and yay or nay it or give their experience, don't have much to go on. But it seems like that would be the case right now, just given what I'm kind of hearing from different companies that I talk to and things like that. So
and it's been interesting, like even like the local OWASP chapter, talking to people that are getting into the industry, right? Like there are definitely more people that are involved that do product and application security that come to OWASP. But there is quite a contingent of newbies, right? Like, students and others that are coming out of colleges or, or training programs, whatever, that are looking for that first job. And it does feel like there's a little bit of a lack of opportunity out there at the moment. And I think that's, to your point, that comes from the layoffs, everything else that's happened in kind of the tech industry over the last couple of years means that there are more people in the space than there was in the past, or more availability in the space. So of course, any company is going to snap up somebody that has 5 to 10 years experience over somebody that only has a degree, right?
And it makes you wonder if software security related roles are going to be impacted the same way as like a red team role. Well, I shouldn't say red team, because I feel like red team, oh man, I'd be curious to hear anybody who works on a red team's take on this. But I managed a red team at GitHub, and my thinking was red team's really a place for people that already have experience. In my one scenario that I'm saying this because I know I'm not the most knowledgeable person in the world on red teams, but in the one instance I had when I was managing a team, it seemed like, man, I don't think I'd want anybody who's kind of new to security in general to work on a red team, because you have to be very versatile and knowledgeable in many domains when it comes to red team. I feel like red team is a better spot for somebody who's already, even done like help desk before, server management, networking, and then maybe some security stuff after. If you've done all those things, like even the security thing after part is like, cool that you've done that. But in reality, it's like, I feel like those folks have to know so many different, functionally need to understand so many different domains that it just doesn't feel like a place I would want to put somebody who is newer. But anyways, that's getting off on a tangent. So like, no, I just don't know if AppSec is affected the same way. I don't know. It's kind of an ask,
Yeah, I believe that it is, right? Because we're getting to that point that companies, when they're looking for application security talent, are looking for very specific experience, right? So, like we had this discussion, or I had this discussion with Ron Paris, right? I think when he was in our course or whatever it was, like, he's like, he was saying like, he's amazed that people will let us look at their source code and identify vulnerabilities, like especially across various domains, like so many domains, and so many different types. Part of that is like the secure code review methodology that we use, but a lot of it as well is just the experience that we have, right? The fact that, man, after 20 years looking at source code, right? Like I can harken back to a time when I looked at Fortran, right? Like, and part of that was, man, at the time I was a junior, person on a security team, right? But that was not necessarily the role. It just happened to be something that we needed to pick up at the time, right? Like it was very much like an analyst type role. And if there isn't like this idea of like, we can take a junior, to Andrew's point, right? Like that we can take a junior and grow them and teach them these different aspects, they're never going to get to the point that they will be in a senior position and be able to apply that experience to multiple organizations or be useful. I mean, some of that is just straight career growth, some of it is like willingness for someone coming out of a CS program or one of the boot camps to go and do grunt work, right? And put in the time. Everybody wants to come out and be a top bug bounty researcher, but be a top red teamer pen tester. And most situations don't necessarily call for that, especially when you don't have the experience already, right? It's chicken and egg problem, right? Like what comes first? Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, I will say this. I was watching the CEO of Netflix on a podcast, kind of, one thing he said really stood out to me. I'll keep it brief because I know you've got to go, right? So
I got a couple minutes,
basically. Okay, good. Well, he just basically said, like he used to do triathlons, and in triathlons at the very beginning, it's, if you don't get out ahead of the pack, you're just like bumping into each other and you're getting pushed under the water and all that, right? So your best bet is early on to immediately sprint as fast as you can, get ahead out of everybody, and then you can do the regular pace that you would have done and take your time and all that stuff, right? And he's like, that's the really what it is in your career, right? Like that's in the early years, you're trying to really, you have nothing to go on yet, so you're really trying to ideally push, get as far and fast and like work hard and get through all that. That's not sustainable for your entire career, but that is, I actually see that as how, you know, I progressed in my career, which was, yeah, I would do things people wouldn't do. I would work longer hours, I would learn more, I would study constantly, I would apply that constantly. But then, yeah, like as time goes on, it's not to say I've always worked pretty hard. If, sure, great, but like diminishing returns, right? You know, quality of life and everything. So, I thought that was really, to me, that was relatable. It makes a lot of sense to say like, hey, yeah, what you were saying, like when you're early on, go, and then you'll have the time later to once you've differentiated yourself, you'll have the time to build, you know, at a reasonable pace and explore and all that stuff.
Yeah. And I do want to address Jason's comment there too, right? Like anything in security, it depends on the red team. Some groups can afford to give more junior level tasks to a junior level person on a red team. And he's absolutely right. You know, it's going to depend on the environment, right? Like, you know, you over in a large organization that is very nuanced with red team, most likely a junior might not be the person that you would want on that. But on the flip side, right, and even like from my perspective as running a company, and we're, you know, dealing with a lot of like more immature organizations, some of those junior tasks and the ability to identify low-hanging fruit doesn't require my expertise. You know what I mean? It's easy enough to pull somebody in that has a couple of years of experience and they can identify things like, you know, take your pick, right? Like user enumeration, the OWASP top 10 style vulnerabilities. That's great. They may not find the, you know, super nuanced privilege escalation vulnerabilities that require like timing attacks, you know, just because they've never seen that sort of thing or they haven't looked at Fortran before, right? But we've got to have a pathway for them, right? We've got to be able to bring somebody that has a desire but little to no knowledge, to the point that they have the knowledge to be effective and can perform those tasks.
Well, according to Andrew, you'll have a competitive advantage. Taking that approach. I like it. I mean, I agree.
You do, right? And I mean, Andrew's been in this situation before as well, right? Like this is, you know, honestly, this is probably something we should, you know, do a talk on or do a community discussion about, right? Like how to help juniors progress and have some sort of plan in place to do that. But I've seen this across multiple organizations, helping like large tech companies try and take developers or even like junior level security analysts and turn them into, you know, your InfoSec rock star that can walk into any situation and talk to people and then like find the vulnerabilities and help developers like through this process. It's not a natural progression, and some of it is hard, right? Like a lot of what you and I have gone through in growing our career, there's been a lot of missteps. I'll admit it, right? Like I've been in situations where I should have spoke up and I didn't. I've been in situations where, like, you know, you and I have like worked for people that we probably shouldn't have worked for and promoted things and, you know, made calls, been antagonistic with developers and, you know, other business people. And like, but without that experience or like ways to share that experience with juniors, we're never going to get to a point that they can actually thrive in those same situations.
I actually thought about whether it was a talk or whether it was on the podcast, putting together a list of my top like 5 or top 10. I have enough of them. Believe me, I have a lot of mistakes I've made. So I almost thought about doing what you're talking about, like putting together a list and like literally being like, okay, let me give you my mistakes and maybe that'll help you not make those mistakes.
You know? At least you can make your own mistakes and not the same ones that I made.
Different ones. Exactly.
Yeah.
Tread new ground with your mistakes.
No, it would be an interesting thing to do, right? Like, because I know we have that article up on the Absolute AppSec, like the blog, like getting into information or getting into application security, like, recommendations for that, we should revisit it, right? Like, mistakes that we've made, because it is practical. It's practical use as far as, everyone has those. And a lot of times we don't want to talk about it because it's embarrassing, right? Like, I probably shouldn't have done that, right? Like, oh, we probably should have, we probably should have notified the project, a week before that we found a, account takeover in it and not released it publicly, right? Like that kind of thing happens, and you can learn from it, or others can learn from it. So,
yeah. And luckily I have no shame anymore, or any pride left to destroy. I'm happy to share all the mistakes. So cool.
Yeah.
Well, I know you got to get going. I don't want to keep you forever. I know today you got a meeting.
Yeah, no worries. We'll go ahead and bounce. Thanks for the the discussion today. Again, it's been good, right? Like we didn't have a lot of
appreciate the input from folks too.
Yep, exactly.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Nope, you're good. Thanks to those that are involved in Slack or on YouTube. And sign up for training if you can, if you'd like to jump into the harnessing LLMs. But otherwise, we will be back next week, and we are lining up guests. If you have somebody that you would like to be on the podcast or you'd like to hear from, let us know and we'll reach out. But otherwise, we'll just see everybody online.
Thank you.
Thanks all.